on, Nerd Paraders and fellow Wasteland Nomads. Welcome here to the channel. Thank you so much for coming to hang with us today as we play some more Last Oasis. Now, in today's video, we're going to be going over some of the more complex and complicated mechanics of Last Oasis, and that has to do with the weapons, armor, and damage system in the game. We're going to try to make it as simple as possible for you to understand, and how you can benefit from the knowledge. I am Nick, this is Nerd Parade, guys. Welcome here to the channel, and thank you so much for coming to hang. If at any point you find this video is educational and informational, as well as entertaining, tag the thumbs up button for us. Let us know that you like the stuff that way, and let us know that we helped you out. If at any point you find you haven't done so yet, tag the subscribe button so you can stay up to date and ring the bell. Now, we are going to be talking about a couple of things here in this video today, but before we get started, and disclaimer, this was recorded during pre-alpha 1.0.29, etc., etc., etc. Please check the date of the video. The information may be accurate here in the future, or it may change. I don't know the direction the devs are planning on taking the game. But right now, at the current state, is all we can speak for. So definitely be sure to check the date of the video, and hopefully it stays this way, future-proof, and the information is available for all times. Now, we did a lot of stuff for science.
No, not like this. Oh no, please, not like this.
And just general entertainment. But we have tested damage numbers extensively, as well as armor values and weapon values. So, without further ado, we're going to jump right into it, and let us know what you think. We've got Rambait here, who's going to assist us with the damage number testing. And before we get into anything super deep, we need to understand damage and how the numbers work in and of themselves. We're going to try to keep this video tutorial about as simple as we possibly can, but we're going to show you a couple of different things. Now, Last Oasis has a really interesting system to where different types of attacks, upward strike, left to right, and then right to left, they each do different types of damage. The truest and most reliable is right to left attack. So we're going to do a right to left attack on Rambait, right here, right to left, and we're going to whack him for 51 damage. That is the exact amount of damage that our mallet blade does. And we have 0 points in anything. I've reset my character completely. We have no points into anything. And right to left is the truest amount. We're going to do a left to right attack here real quick. And as you can see, it does a little bit less damage, but the speed is faster. So there are a couple of variables here in the direction that you attack. But for the purposes of this testing and showcase and keeping things as simple as absolute possible, we're only going to do right to left attacks for the truest damage numbers. And Rambait needs to get healed up. He's already healing, and we're gonna explain damage, and by doing that, we're gonna put points into damage. Now, the way that it works is it's roughly 1 point of damage per point. So I'm gonna be putting 10 points in here, and I'm gonna be doing 61 points of damage to Rambert with our left to right, our right to left swing here. So we're gonna do 61 points now, or 62, since apparently it's almost 1 point. And 62, 63. Okay, that was a speed bonus. That is another thing that I kind of need to talk about with variables. And when you're in combat, I didn't keep it super vanilla there, but when you're in combat, if you're running around and moving and swinging, you will get bonuses. You can even combo people. So the more you hit the same target and chain attacks together, you do more damage. And the way to interrupt that is the opponent has to get a successful block. Is Rambo's health up? Okay, so we need to stand completely still and left to right, right and left attack. 62 points. So it's a little bit more than 1 point per level. So I'd say maybe like 1.2. So we're going to get into a little bit of the dancing around mechanics. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run at Rambert here, and we're going to whack him. See, I did 71 damage to him with a left to right swing. That's kind of what I'm talking about, that you get multipliers and speed bonuses. It's really hard to achieve, but it is possible to one-shot a person. If you're coming in at a dive bomb wearing a wingsuit or something like that, you can get an insane momentum bonus, and you can do insane amounts of damage. It is possible, but for the sake of testing and showing you the damage mechanics and how things work with armor and weapons, what we're going to be showing off here today, we're going to be doing just our standard standing, right to left, and no kind of combo bonuses. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a couple of different weapons, explain how the weapons work, and a couple of different armors. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about the armors and the weapons that we have. Now, I've been doing all this testing here with the mallet blade, but I am going to use my potion here and go back to 0 points into melee. So now that we've covered how the basic damage works in Last Oasis, again, the very basic, we're not getting into multipliers or anything like that for the sake of this video and for the testing. We're going to talk about armor and weapon types and the benefits that they have. So there are 2 very strong stats on your armor and 2 very strong stats on your weapons, and these 2 work together, and you'll see in this video how they do that because I'm going to explain it to you. So we're going to take one of the current PvP metas in Last Oasis, and that is the Brittle Bone Armor. Now, the Brittle Bone Armor is your chest and leg piece here, and it's got 2 stats on it. 3 stats, but we're going to ignore speed reduction for now. We have your percentage number here, which is your absorption. Now, this is the percent that you'll see on armors. So we'll look at Carapace armor, minus 48%. That is your absorption. Minus 43%, that is your absorption. The number next to it is your reduction. So these 2 work hand in hand because we're going to take a look at the mallet blade, what I was just using, and you'll see that the stats below the damage say versus absorption, it does 130% damage. But versus reduction, it only does 100% damage. So it'll do 100% damage versus reduction type, but versus absorption type, so if an armor is heavy in absorption, it does 130% damage. So it does more than it would do its basic 51. So it means it's more effective against heavy absorption types. Carapace is a heavy absorption type. Brittle Bone is a heavy absorption type. Now, let's take a look over here at Baskwood and ultimately Iron Studded. These are heavy reduction types, currently some of the best reduction types in the game. Iron Studded armor at the current time of recording is very, very challenging to get because iron ingots are not easily acquirable. However, Baskwood is very affordable and can be very useful against bladed weapons because they don't have a lot of absorption, but they do have a lot of reduction compared to other types of weaponry. This will stack well with the bracers and the boots. Like, all this stuff adds together to compound a total for your character's melee resistance of sort. So now that we've covered the armor types and more or less how that works, we're going to cover some of the weapon types, and you have 4. There's 4 types of weapons. You have your bladed weapons, which are kind of like your swords. You have your axe weapons. You have your smashing weapons, such as mauls. So we have blades, axes. Here's your maces and mauls. And then finally, you have your quarterstaffs. There's pros and cons to each of these, and we're going to get into them. We're going to break them down here a little bit, and we're going to try to do it as simply as possible. So we were using the short mallet blade. This is a current PvP meta. It's a very strong one-handed weapon. It's pretty darn fast. And another current PvP meta is the Bone Spike Sword. These are really good weapons. They're relatively cheap to make, and they excel versus absorption type armor, which means your brittle bone and your carapace armors, they're going to do slightly more. In fact, only 20% more for the bone spike and 30% more for the short mallet blade against those specific types of resistances. Then you have your axes, which are surprisingly pretty good. Your axes work very well against both types, as you can see. So we're going to look at the advanced hatchet, which most people consider a tool. It can also be a really strong weapon. So you have 125% and 125% versus both damage and reduction. Your axes are going to be your most balanced damage dealing weapon, and we're going to show that off here after we do the little explanation. They're just a bit slower than the swords. As you can see, 100 speed versus 105 speed or even 110 speed with the bone spike. And then you have your mace weapons. We're going to take a look at the short ceramic hoof mace here. Those don't do very good against absorption type armors, but they excel versus reduction type armors. But there's something you need to keep in mind here, is that armors have 2 types, and both of those types work together on your character. So while this might have 150% versus reduction, it's only 80% versus absorption. These 2 things do work together, and you're going to see it when we show it off here against different armor types, that the 150 might not offset the 80. And finally, you have your quarterstaffs. Now, quarterstaffs are very bland on paper. They look really bad because they have bad stats versus absorption and bad stats versus reduction comparable to the other types of weaponry. They do have decent raw damage when you start getting over here in the things that I haven't unlocked yet, but you'll see 110 versus absorption, 70. These types of weapons, specifically the quarterstaff, I'd like to put in their own tier. They don't excel versus any type of armor. They don't necessarily excel when it comes to damage numbers, because you'll look over at some of these right here, like 99 damage from the Niberian Battle Axe. They don't excel directly from a lot of damage, but what they do excel from is utility. So I like to split that off into its own categories. So I have 3 categories of weapons: your bladed, your axes, and your blunt. Then finally, quarterstaff is over on the other tier, and I'll show you exactly why I separate that, because we're going to equip a blunt quarterstaff here right now, and we're going to do something cool with it. Wapow. Now, you might not have caught that right away, but we'll do it at a different angle here. Wapow. You swing that sucker like a baseball bat. You swing it like a baseball bat. These things have range. So you could excel, if you master the quarterstaff, you can excel at multiple combat situations, multiple person combat situations. So if you're 2v1ing someone, you might choose the utility of a long weapon to fend off multiple opponents. So I like to branch that off into a completely separate category, because those could excel when fighting off multiple opponents, and they have a lot of utility. Sorry, Rambate, I whacked you, but those long-range attacks, keep in mind, only come with the power-up version. Otherwise, you're just going to do these kind of like quick attacks, and it doesn't have the range that you would have with the power. Now Rambo is in brittle bone armor, and we're going to go through the different types of damage with the different types of weapons against a couple of different types of armor, specifically the brittle bone and the basswood armor, to showcase the differences between absorption and reduction, how they work together, and how different types of weapons go against them. Now, we're going to do our standard right to left attack, and full disclosure, many Rambos were harmed in the making of this video. I'm sorry, buddy, but I gotta whack you some more. So here we go, versus brittle bone. First thing up is our ceramic hoof mace, and we're gonna go right to left, and we're gonna whack him. We only did 19 damage. While the hoof mace does excel versus reduction types, the absorption type, it does 80%. So a heavy absorption armor, such as brittle bone, it's not gonna work that well against, because that's just kind of, that's the math behind it. It's going to excel more against types of armor like basswood. So I'm gonna have Rambo switch up into his basswood armor. And now that he's in it, we're gonna do our standard right to left attack. And you'll see it did 31 damage. It does a lot more against basswood. But we're gonna swap over. We're gonna leave Rambo in his basswood, let him bandage up real quick. And we're gonna do a whack with the mallet blade. And the results may shock you. 31 damage. Right? What the hell? The mallet blade has completely different stats from the ceramic hoof mace. Why though? Why is it doing that? That's because the 80% versus absorption and the 150 versus reduction, even in basswood armor, isn't enough to offset the combo, because those stats work together to protect your character. So the mallet blade ends up coming up out on top, in my opinion, or the bladed weapon ends up coming out on top because of the less overall reduction versus the absorb type. Now comes the real mind blower. Most people might look at an advanced hatchet as a farming tool, but this puppy is actually a really solid weapon. It does equal damage versus absorption and reduction. It's a little bit slower than your standard, one-handed bladed weapons, but we're gonna go up to Rambo here in still basswood armor, and we're gonna whack him right to left. 33 damage. It's 2 damage higher than what we were doing with not only the ceramic, but the mallet blade. So that 125 plus 125 is a more balanced version of damage dealing, regardless of the type of armor that your character might be wearing. So what my personal opinion is axes are the most balanced weapon in any type of combat, where bladed weapons and blunt weapons have more of a niche versus armor type. So now we have Rambo in his brittle bone armor. We're going to start it from the beginning. We're going to go blunt ceramic hoof mace, we're going to go mallet blade, and then we're going to go axe again and repeat the same thing. Again, all attacks will be going right to left. And we have 27 damage here for the ceramic hoof mace. Now that, against brittle bone armor, is not super great. And that's because of the reduction versus absorption. We're going to go to mallet blade. We're going to whack Rambo with that now. 35. I hope you're starting to follow. Versus absorption. Brittle bone is a heavy absorption type. We're going to do axe now. That was 35, right? I need to write that down. So we have 29, 35, and then... I hope I got those numbers right. I'm doing it from memory. Whack! 34. Now, while the blade might do one more damage to poor Rambo here, the axe not only excelled versus basswood, but also did basically one less damage than the short mallet blade, even though it's got 2 more points of damage in it. It did 1 point less of damage against the brittle bone. That's why I'm saying that I prefer the hand axe in most types of PvP situations when it comes to armor type, because whether they're running around in carapace, basswood, or brittle bone, you can rely on that to do pretty much consistent damage all the way through. We've tried to break this down and simplify it as much as possible to make it easy for everyone to understand for tutorial purposes. There are a couple of things that we did discuss earlier. The moving around in combat, getting, I would like to say opportunistic hits, speed multipliers, that type of thing. The way that you attack, you know, above the head strike downward, charge attacks are another thing. Yeah, 59 damage. Charge attacks are a thing. They hurt. Attacking left to right, it does a little bit less damage, but it's a faster strike. Right to left is kind of like the true strike. These are things that we really didn't get into, but they do add multipliers in the combat system that is Last Oasis. We're doing this video specifically for the numbers to give you guys the information to help you make an educated decision on what you like. Personally, I prefer the axe because it's a very balanced weapon regardless of the armor type that the enemy is wearing, which we covered in this video. Bladed weapons are faster. They're very good against absorption types. They're not super great against damage reduction types. So bladed weapons going against basswood armor are going to have a little bit harder time than they would against brittle bone. Again, I'm just using these as a reference because they're the current PvP meta in the game. Blunt weapons and maces. The loss that you get when it comes to your absorption versus your reduction, I feel like makes them more or less equivalent to the bladed weapons. So I don't feel like there's a big bonus to using maces at the current time of the game. This may change, and this is only my personal opinion. I just don't really care for them too much. And then you have the massive utility from the quarterstaff. When fighting multiple opponents, as you can see, the range is really huge, and it's pretty simple to block with it, I think, because you kind of know whatever direction it's coming in. This is more of a utility weapon. It doesn't excel in combat, and I believe it belongs in its own, like, 3rd tier, but if you're definitely going into war and planning on fighting multiple opponents, consider getting good with this type of weapon, because it could really change the tide of battle for you. In your 1v1s or anything of that nature, check out axes for overall potential and power. Go for your bladed weapons when you're going against types of armor like brittle bone. And at the current state of the game, my personal opinion and advice is to kind of steer clear of the blunt weapons. The armor and weapon system in Last Oasis can be a bit confusing at first glance, but your pal Nerd Parade is here. We've whacked each other multiple times for the greater good of science and figuring out the system, and we have tried to do everything that we can to explain it to not only our tribe mates, but to you guys out there in the land of tubes of Ubery, and hopefully this video earned a thumbs up from you. Let us know what you think in the comments below. It is a bit confusing, but I like to think we did a great job explaining it, and the absorption versus reduction mechanic is very interesting, but it may change in the future. This game is still pre-alpha at the time of recording, so if it changes, we'll be here to educate you again in the future. If it doesn't change, then this video will last through the tests of time to answer all questions now and in the future. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Be sure to ring the bell out there to stay updated with all things Nerd Parade. But most importantly of all, I want you guys to remember to take care of yourselves out there. Stay awesome. Come and play Last Oasis with us if you want to whack Rambo for fun and science. Get wrecked. and we'll catch you in the next third parade video. Later.